We're going to have runway in Apollo for well over the next 2 years. We'll be able to continue to advance on our Calico project in Southern California. The next major step for us down there is to begin economic studies. That process will really get kicked off in 2026. There's going to be an exploration program as well down there. With the new mule claims that we added on to Calico about 5 months ago. We added additional claims, and they're really blue sky potential for us. They're on strike of the Calico fault, which is really responsible for why the silver's there in the first place. So you've got that big long fault trend. That's going to be exploration. So the funds are going to go into both project advancement, exploration in California, and should we be fortunate enough to have an access agreement for a project down in Mexico, that's the Cinco de Mayo in Chihuahua. We're also well funded for that. For us, that probably translates into about a $5 or $6 million drill program. So no matter how busy we're going to be, and we will be busy, we're really looking at least 2-3 years runway in front of us.
And you were just at the county forum for San Bernardino. I'd love to hear what the sentiment was.
I think what's really happened just, over the course of, well, we've seen it in just several months, but really if you step back and look over the last couple of years, I think there's been some fundamental changes in the perception of the jurisdiction in California. We're really aware that San Bernardino is such we'll call it a progressive county, the most important mining county to California. Just in generalities, we're talking to investors and they hear you're in California, the first impression a lot of people have is, oh, that's too bad, because they expect that, not a lot happens in California mining wise. But take a closer look. The real thing that differentiates one area versus another is the county, how it's set up, and how do they actually view mining. And San Bernardino is really an important mining district. There's some 90 active mining operations going on within the county itself right now. A lot of those are aggregate mines, so there's gravel mining. As you've just cited, there's MP Materials with their very large rare earth deposit operation. You've got Equinox Gold with Castle Mountain. This is a county that we know we can operate within. And, the message that we heard loud and clear is that San Bernardino is open for business. They wanted industry to come down, meet with all their representatives. And basically, they were asking the questions, how can we help you with your project?
For disclosure purposes, our site does not make recommendations for purchases or sale of stocks, services, or products. Nothing on our site or this podcast should be construed as an offer or solicitation to buy or sell products or securities. All investing involves risk and possible losses. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For disclosure purposes, Apollo Silver is a paid-for client on the Investor Ideas website.
Ross, it's great to have you back on the show. Your raise is very close to closing. I'm imagining might even be closed by the time this airs. Do you want to talk to investors and followers about the use of proceeds for the 25 million plus that you're raising?
Yeah, sure. And I think at the end of the day, we're looking, Callie, at around probably a little closer to $27 million. And that closed completely this week. Really, that's going to give us sufficient funds. I think we're going to have runway in Apollo for well over the next 2 years. We'll be able to continue to advance on our Calico project in Southern California. The next major step for us down there is to begin economic studies. And we'll, that process will really get kicked off in 2026. There's going to be an exploration program as well down there. With the new mule claims that we added on to Calico, I guess it was back in May, so about 5 months ago. We added additional claims, and they're really blue sky potential for us there on strike of the Calico fault, which is really responsible for why the silver's there in the first place. So, you've got that big long fault trend, and the new ground is adjacent to the east of that. That's going to be exploration. So, the funds are going to go into both project advancement, exploration in California, and we don't have a budget fully worked out yet for what that's going to be in 2026, but I kind of anticipate probably no more for the calendar year than $5 or $6 million, we'll say. Should we be fortunate enough to have an access agreement for a project down in Mexico, that's the Cinco de Mayo in Chihuahua, we're also well funded for that as well, because as you may recall, one of the option terms is to drill 20,000 meters of drilling on Cinco, and for us that probably translates into about a $5 or $6 million drill program. So no matter how busy we're going to be, and we will be busy, we're really looking at least 2-3 years runway in front of us, just with the money that we'll have in place. And if we're fortunate enough, the warrants will get exercised. We've got a series of warrants that expire next July, so July of 2026, and then they'll all be in the money and should be exercised. That could bring in an additional close to $30 million. So, we're pretty well situated for the level of work that we're doing right now for quite some time.
Well, we both know that you and Andy are well capable of raising capital, and it's great to hear that the story can go across the line with that financing. So is it safe to assume that most of it, like to look just a little bit into the future, would be the PEA for Waterloo, and then some of the exploration along Langtry and Cinco de Mayo would be a blue sky opportunity if and when that shows up down the road that we can share?
Yeah, I think that's pretty right. That's how we envision it, being active in both Southern California and in Mexico. So, it's going to be a busy time for us, 26 and beyond.
I know that there is some similarities with Langtry compared to Waterloo, but is it as close to surface as Waterloo project? As investors are probably excited to hear what's the next steps on that.
Langtry and Waterloo both occur along the same fault zone. That's the Calico fault zone. Langtry is slightly different. It occurs on a splay of the major fault zone, but the rock type that the mineralization is in is identical. The style of mineralization is identical. The grade of the deposit itself is really similar. There's, Waterloo's a little bit more well known. It has a lot more holes in it, so and the confidence level of the resource at Waterloo is higher. It's drilled at measured and indicated primarily, whereas Langtry, it's drilled mostly inferred. The real difference, I think, between the two is Langtry looks to be about half the size of Waterloo. So where Waterloo is, roughly about 125 million ounces of silver in its various categories, Langtry is about 57.5 million ounces of silver. That's at inferred. It is a little bit deeper down in the system, but the mineralization does come up to surface as well. So there are a lot of similars. I think there's more things that are similar between Langtry and Waterloo than things that differentiate it. I suspect they're two sides of the same coin.
When I started in May with Apollo, the number one comment from investors was California. I don't know about California. And MP Materials obviously changed that. Equinox with their Fast 41. And you were just at the county forum for San Bernardino. I'd love to hear what the sentiment was, what some of the conversations were between some of the government and then the mining companies and heads there.
I think what's really happened just, over the course of, well, we've seen it in just several months, but really if you step back and look over the last couple of years, I think there's been some fundamental changes in the perception of the jurisdiction in California. We're really aware that San Bernardino is such we'll call it a progressive county. It's the most important mining county to California. If you just speak just in generalities, we're talking to investors and they hear you're in California, the first impression a lot of people have is, oh, that's too bad, because they expect that, not a lot happens in California mining wise. But take a closer look. The real thing that differentiates one area versus another is the county, how it's set up, and how do they actually view mining. And San Bernardino is really an important mining district. There's some 90 active mining operations going on within the county itself right now. A lot of those are aggregate mines, so there's gravel mining. As you just cited, there's MP Materials with their very large rare earth deposit operation. You've got Equinox Gold with Castle Mountain. It's recent receiving of the FAST 41 designation on permitting. This is a county that we know we can operate within. And, to that extent, what would it be, about a month ago now, I was down, invited to San Bernardino County to meet with all of the heads of state, all the CEO of the county, the various directors of land use, the assessment. Basically, all the heads came together to introduce the new director of land use to industry. They had a one-day luncheon down there, and the message that we heard loud and clear is that San Bernardino is open for business. They wanted industry to come down, meet with all their representatives, and basically they were asking the questions, how can we help you with your project? They understand the importance of mining to San Bernardino, and we're fortunate to have such a significant asset in Calico there. But I'm really quite confident that this is an area that encourages development and that we can see a process all the way through.
Without getting into details that we can't share, what was the sentiment about some of the challenges? I'm assuming water is a challenge in California, and obviously with people from MP, Equinox, and city officials, government officials, was there a conversation about how to move that forward in a progressive way for everyone involved there?
Yeah, I think water is going to be probably the most important thing that we have to deal with. Put it this way, it is probably representative of the most significant hurdle that we'll have in the permitting scheme. The Mojave Basin is an adjudicated basin. They allow a certain amount of water out there. You can buy water rights, so you can always access water. There's plenty of water in the groundwater aquifers, in the region. It's just that it comes with a cost. So there's a price to be paid to get water. We're going to be very creative in how we obtain our water rights down there. And so I think that this project's going to be able to handle the cost, we'll say, to be able to access all the water that we need. We know we've got a very, as I said already, we've got a progressive environment on the permitting side. Both of our deposits, Langtry and Waterloo, are almost entirely held on private land that has vested mining rights. So, we've pretty much got everything going in our way down there. But you're right, water is going to be one of the more significant hurdles that we do face down in on the Calico project.
The county forum, how has the trajectory changed? Why did San Bernardino become so positive and forward thinking? Is it the critical minerals and the administration change over the last couple of years, the MP material story? Do you want to just walk investors through what they used to think California is to what it is now?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that comment. One thing that they drove home to the entire luncheon, as I said, it was a lot of industry people as well as government, about 50-50 between government and industry. What they drove home was that they understand that this is a whole new regime in place, much more progressive for mining. I think they're always a little bit more forward thinking anyways, and probably, maybe led California, with that attitude. But they recognize very well that even federally, this is an administration that is much more pro-mining than what they'd seen in the past. And they're really taking the lead, how the federal administration is handling mining more so than anything else. And they're basically trying to replicate that or make sure that they fall in, along that method. So, I think that was what was really encouraging. And we heard that from the leadership all the way from the top, down to the various levels of heads of different departments at the county. So, that was certainly the sense that I got down there, was that they were, things have changed down there. They absolutely recognize just how important mining is to the overall economy, and they want to do everything they can to encourage it.
Can we talk a little bit for any of the following or investors that are new to the story? You obviously just had your updated MRE, and then you just filed for your 43-101. Apollo has zinc, barite, critical minerals. We're counting down, assuming at some point silver is also going to be a critical mineral this year. Just walk us through some of the results.
Absolutely, and I think critical minerals is really that's the key phrase now, and that's also why the county is really quite progressive as well, because as I said, they're following in line, understanding the need, moving the critical mineral pathway forward. So we, for the first time, were able to, put some numbers behind critical minerals, barite and zinc, and those are on the Waterloo deposit. I'm sure they exist as well on Langtry, but we've not evaluated Langtry for that. So, we have a significant portion of zinc now in the indicated category as well as inferred. So combine the two, like a little over 300 million pounds of zinc in indicated, just under 300 million pounds of zinc in inferred category. You've got barite, which is another critical mineral. Combined, indicated and inferred, you're looking at around 3.2 million tons of barite. I think, well, there's some gold as well. Now, gold's not classified as a critical mineral, but everybody knows the value of gold too, around $4,000 an ounce. Gold, every ounce is pretty important. So there is gold in the system as well. But this is still a project that is dominated by the value of silver. If we kind of look at the overall resource, I'd say silver accounts for something like 75%, maybe 75 to 80% of the value of the deposits, both Waterloo, well, we don't know Langtry, but for Waterloo, really it's still a silver-driven project, and that's why we always make a point of saying that this is a not only a large deposit, but it's one of the largest in the U.S. with respect to silver being the primary mineral. So it's all about the price of silver with how this project moves forward.
I'd love your commentary that obviously gold has had a pullback, but silver, it looks like there's the possible squeeze that's going to happen again with the possibility that it's going to become a critical mineral. There's a lot of hype behind silver, and yet we've seen junior mining companies all have a pullback as well just because of the price of gold. What's your commentary on why I think, I personally believe it's a fantastic opportunity to buy junior mining stocks right now, but I'd love your commentary as well.
Both gold and silver, well, and all metals for that matter, but just talking specifically in the precious metals, they've had a really good run for, several months. Nothing ever goes up in a straight line. I think seeing a pullback over the last week or so in both gold and silver prices is not unexpected, and it should even be, I think investors should be aware of that. Nothing, as I say, is going to go up every single day. But if you look at the overall trend, I think it's pretty clear that precious metals are, they haven't settled out yet. A lot of smart people in this business that are, make a living at prognosticating prices on gold and silver see much, much higher than where we're at right now. Silver, some of the discussions I've heard around silver is that it's, it could well be, ending the year at $65 is what I've heard, but certainly up a double or even triple over some period of time going forward. I think that you take this opportunity like we've seen in the last week in the market, and you're a believer in the precious metals, and you have a conviction in there. You take the attitude that you just said, which is, you know, you look at these as buying opportunities. Still find your favorite companies, the ones with assets that you like in jurisdictions that you like, with management that can move projects forward, and you take that opportunity. You use the downturn in the last week or so to add to your positions. I mean, that's how I approach my own investment. I'm not just speaking for Apollo Silver with that comment. I sort of take that whole approach with everything across my universe of metal investment. So I'm very, very bullish. I think this is temporary, but it's also healthy. You just can't expect gold to be going up by $50 every day, as we were sort of seeing, you know, prior to the fallback. But it's still at healthy values. Silver, the same story. You know, I think silver's got even a better trajectory ahead of it than gold, for that matter. So,
Ross, I would love, I know you guys have been busy. You've been at a lot of conferences throughout the States. And obviously, with that barite and zinc add-on, the critical minerals really has a nice development story coming for Apollo. What's been the sentiment on the US front? Because again, with the administration change, I feel like having a property there, right time, right place to add those two critical minerals to your story.
you're just in the right place at the right time, and I know that assets in the U.S. Are valued with a certain premium as opposed to assets outside of the U.S. Because there's, you know, the whole environment is really all about developing its own. You know, the U.S. wants to develop its own resources and become, you know, significantly less dependent on other countries' critical elements that they need to power the future. So, you know, I think there's every reason to remain extremely optimistic and confident, you know, by having assets, I think in particular, North America and US specifically.
Is there any conferences coming up that investors can find you at, or best ways to reach out to you through the end of the year?
Yeah, well, I'm off to Zurich next week for the the precious metal forum it's in the second week in November. So we'll be attending that. I'll also be in Toronto in early November attending the Red Cloud mining forum. So it's going to be busy. It has been busy. The last month has been all about being on the road and getting our message out. We had a really, really great conference down at Beaver Creek in Colorado in September. I just came back from a week on the road last week, attending an SCP one-day silver conference in Toronto, as well as attending a smaller conference called the Hidden Gems in New York. That was really quite a good little conference as well. So, but Zurich in early November. After that, I'm sure there'll be more, but we're gearing up. It is a very, very busy fall of 2025, and it really looks like 2026 is going to be everything 2025 was and more.
Ross, do you have any closing commentary that you want to share with current shareholders and potential new shareholders to end the show?
I guess the way we started the conversation, talking about money now in the treasury, that really seeing companies that have a very healthy treasury, and now we're well set for the next couple of years. We've got plans in place. We've got the team, the people. Really, I think we're firing on all cylinders, and so look for some exciting news flow continuing from Apollo and the sector overall. But no, stay tuned, and I think for those that enjoy precious metals, find your favorite companies and think about that. Think about adding positions to your investment.